how have these different mentors shaped your approach to composition?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. I think, yeah, all the teachers sort of like offered something distinct to me. I guess I'll go in chronological order.
Mm-hmm.
So with James Ledger, he was my
Mm-hmm.
teacher at the University of Western Australia.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, I hadn't composed, before I began college. So it
Mm-hmm.
was, I guess, like it's some people go into the composition, degree and like they've composed things before and now they
Mm-hmm.
want to continue. But I guess my into composition was like I was really interested in like contemporary music,
Mm-hmm.
new music. So I think he like really, I mean, he sort of like established my like fundamentals of composition, not just in like the traditional way, whatever it is, like
Right.
understanding like
Mm-hmm.
how to use pitch, how to orchestrate and
Right.
things like that, but also like exposing me to like um a whole host of repertoire, especially like the late 20th century, like the European avant-garde. Also
Right.
well, also in America and Australian composers as well. But yeah, I mean he was huge because he sort of like I had I don't really think I had like an inkling of an idea of what
Mm-hmm.
composition was, but he sort
Mm-hmm.
of like really gave me an initial understanding.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the first 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like the what he provided for me was that he sort of like the way he teaches composition is like he makes you compose in
Mm-hmm.
like a whole host of different settings. So like
Mm-hmm.
it might be this instrumentation, instrumentation X, instrumentation Y, but also like he had these like challenges like, oh, you can
Mm-hmm.
only use 3 pitch classes, or you
Mm-hmm.
can it has to be bitonal. So he like give these challenges, and I think
Mm-hmm.
like that like opened my it sort of like expanded my gamut of composition. But I at the end of that I was like sort of like tending towards developing sort of like a compositional voice or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I had yet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not that a compositional voice is a static thing, but I hadn't really like really developed the interests that I have today. I
Mm-hmm.
had so I think that's where the next teacher, Elliot Geiger, who is my advisor at the University of Melbourne, he's sort of like yeah, this year was much more free. There wasn't like, the I mean the sort of like structure of that degree was not
Mm-hmm.
it was not like what James had said in the
Mm-hmm.
sense of like
Mm-hmm.
oh, here's a challenge or whatever. It was much more free. There was occasionally there were like instrumentations I had to
Mm-hmm.
follow, but it was much freer. So I think Elliot Geiger, he was
Mm-hmm.
really instrumental in sort of like his way of teaching composition was sort of like asking questions of like why did I do this, and he'd also give me suggestions, but
Right.
his point of view was always like almost like imminent critique. It was always
Mm.
I had to come up with my own critiques in a way. He
Right.
was very good at like yeah making me my own mentor in a way. So he helped me like sort of like realize the beginnings of like what I'm like interested in as a composer. Well, not just a composer, but an artist. And
Right.
like aesthetically, he sort of like yeah he made that possible for me. Um,
Mm.
and then Haya, yeah. So and then my first year at Harvard, I studied with
Mm-hmm.
Haya.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think so. She's sort of like well, first. It was really helpful to study with Elliot because like now that I knew what I wanted to do aesthetically, I could like sort
Mm-hmm.
of like bring that to higher, and she was really good at um sort of like helping me understand that further through metaphor. I think that's
Right.
the thing about Haya.
Mm-hmm.
She even though I sort of like knew what I wanted, she helped me to like illustrate to myself
Mm-hmm.
the sort of like inner intricacies of the sort of like world that I'm interested in. And in a
Right.
way, she would like help me realize more about myself. Yeah,
Mm.
she in it. Oh, or another way to put it is like she almost knew more about what I wanted than what
Mm-hmm.
I did initially, at least
Mm-hmm.
initially. And she would like demonstrate um where James Ledger and Elliot Geiger were much more like I was younger and an undergrad,
Right.
so they would give more advice like, oh, maybe
Right.
this would work better if
Right.
this octave up or something.
Right.
Her advice was much more conceptual,
Mm.
and yeah, she made me think in sort of like a metaphorical strain.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like that the metaphor I keep using this word metaphor. It was really sort of like powerful for me because it sort of
Mm-hmm.
like made me realize things. It made me sort of like imagine a world, and she
Mm-hmm.
was able to sort of like communicate things to me about my own language
Right.
without like being specific, without being
Mm-hmm.
like overly technical. Because I feel like
Right.
if you're overly technical, you can almost like essentialize or oversimplify what I want to
Mm-hmm.
achieve. So I think that that's the thing with Haya. She used metaphor and like this sort of like philosophical basis to like help me
Right.
self-realize it.
Wow, nice.
And and finally Hans,
Mm-hmm.
Hans Tuchku. So I guess like the thing with him is that firstly I hadn't composed much.
Mm-hmm.
I composed a couple of fixed media work like tape pieces before
Mm-hmm.
I studied with him, but he sort of like opened me up to um yeah, the world of electronics much more. I studied
Mm.
I did stuff in Maximus P with him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I we did analog. I took a class in analog synthesis with him, but he also helped me with my purely acoustic works. And I think the thing about him is that he was somewhat similar to Elliot actually.
I see.
He would do this immanent critique thing as well, but
Mm-hmm.
he was also a little more sort of like um he was a little more I'd say a little more concrete than Haya
I see.
in his style of teaching, which is not better or worse, right? It's just a different
Right.
style of teaching.
Yeah, preference. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, he so it was almost like it was still like philosophical, and he wanted me to like think about my own practice, but he would still provide me with like this concrete advice. Not that, oh, you should do this, but
Yeah.
like
Right.
let this like he would give me like pieces of like he suggestions like
Right.
what might this be, and like he would
Mm-hmm.
just let me sit
Mm-hmm.
with it,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
Right.
and then I took another year with Haya after Han. So yeah, those are
Oh,
my
okay.
pieces, yeah.
So the program at Harvard is flexible to switch the mentors?
Yeah, it's pretty flexible.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, great. I mean, same as BU, but I was curious how come, how it works. So you
Yeah.
first with Kaya and went to Hans and then back to Kaya now.
Yeah.
Ah, okay, very nice. Okay, so you explore more electroacoustic music with Hans and then come back to Kaya and now you have much more like insights and and, study and research now, right? Wow. So I'm looking
Exactly.
forward to have your, works in the future.
Oh,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. That's really interesting. Your path from, undergrad now PhD process and have like sort of very important figure mentors, you have went through, and it's really inspiring me. Um, and I have a question about your like culture identity in sound.
mm.
Growing up in Australia, how has your sense of place influenced your relationship with the sound and composition?
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's, yeah. I mean, this is like sort of a big question for
Mm-hmm.
Australian music in general. It's like
Mm,
as a as a new music tradition that sort of like is sort of like distinct from what's happening in Europe, but also America, and also
mm,
I guess like specifically the UK.
mm-hmm.
There's always been this question of like how do you make yourself
Mm-hmm.
distinctly Australian? And there are composers like
Mm-hmm.
Sculthorpe and Ross Edwards, which have tried to tackle these questions. But I sort of like took a very different
Mm-hmm.
route to them, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's sort of a tricky question for me because like so they sort of like they try to I guess part of their philosophy, at least in some part of their
Mm-hmm.
era of composition, was that they try to like evoke
Mm-hmm.
the land of Australia through their music, which I
Mm-hmm.
think is, I think there are some ethical questions to be had
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
about that, especially in relation to how they sort of how indigeneity is represented. So I
Mm-hmm.
think the question is complex for me because I was born in Malaysia and I came
Mm-hmm.
to Australia when I was 9. Uh,
Mm, okay.
so I think like in a sense my language is not it's not like sonically or like orally saliently
Mm-hmm.
Australian in that sense
Mm-hmm.
that you
Mm-hmm.
hear this and it's like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
this is like an Australian composition.
Mm-hmm.
But I think like being here and like studying under these particular teachers
Mm-hmm.
exposed me to particular composers
Mm-hmm.
and including Australian composers.
Right.
And I'd say like I guess like the thing about studying here is that I almost had to look online for a lot of my inspiration, interestingly enough,
Mm-hmm.
even though I was inspired by Australian composers as well. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
I was almost like uh my my language is influenced by me being in Australia, ironically, by like
Mm-hmm.
being more eclectic in my sort of like influences, I guess, rather than being like distinctly, of
Right.
this
Right.
style.
Right.
I I got really interested in like a whole host of things, and I sort of like, yeah, it's hard to. I know this is not a concrete answer, but it's sort of
No,
like
no, no, no. Just be yourself.
um,
That's more
yeah, yeah,
genuine.
and I'll say this like I guess also being here and especially in Perth, there's not like a whole host of
Mm-hmm.
um new music concerts happening all the time. I look to resources like Score Follower a lot,
Mm, okay.
and so that was almost like those were my influences. This music from Score Follower. I mean, and I'm not saying that Score Follower is like a geographic or anything. Obviously, it
Right.
comes from a particular,
Right.
it has it comes from a particular set of cultural circumstances, but like it's
Right.
that was the sort of like orientation for me through
Mm,
resources like that, Score Follower and online score videos in general. Yeah.
right. Mm, I see. So most likely, environment you are situated much more effect on how you become a composer or, communicate with the sound and your work, right? I
Yeah.
guess. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Okay, wow, great. That's interesting. So I understand your work with field recordings at times. What draws you to capturing and incorporating environmental sounds in your compositions?
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, I guess I work I work with field recordings in not the usual way, in the sense
Hmm.
that sometimes you see a lot of pieces that where the composer has gone to take field record, or perhaps they had someone else take field recordings
Right.
and use that as like the tape part for their composition. I don't quite do exactly that. What I do, so I've taken, I've done field recordings in like rural Australia. I was also
Mm,
in Brazil. I was at the Pantanal in Brazil and I took field recordings.
mm,
Also taken field recordings in rural England as well. I
mm-hmm.
think like the idea of field recordings for me is that I find it really powerful to like when I'm sitting in a particular environment to just like sort of sit down and listen and like figure not figure out but sort of like s- um uh sort of like situate yourself in the ecosystem that is
Right.
like around you that is unfolding around you,
Right.
and it's like
Right.
there's always, no matter what environment you're in, there's always a lot of like dynamism and entanglement that
Right.
happens around you. And I find that really beautiful, I guess. So the point of these field recordings for me is to sort of like, it's almost like a memory for me.
Mm,
And I think like I like to listen back to these field recordings because even though they're not the environment itself, like
right.
there's no exact replica
Mm-hmm.
of like being in the space itself. The
Mm-hmm.
field recordings provide me a memory of like the sort of like emotional response I had when I was like situating myself as like a part of this ecosystem or like within this ecosystem.
Right.
It's like I had this like powerful emotional response because
Mm-hmm.
of this powerful experience, and this field recording is almost like a memory for me. And um these memories sort of like bring about emotional responses for me when I listen back to them again,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess these sort of like inspire my compositions. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's different. It's just like field recording is very important for me because of like the emotional substance
Mm-hmm.
they they pro they provide for me in my compositional practice, but they're not like
Mm-hmm.
I guess I don't like put them into my compositions in like a direct sense. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So, in this context, I was curious on other things too. So, your work often explore, interactive sonic networks. Could you walk
Mm.
me through how you conceptualize this in relationship between sounds?
Yeah. Oh, thanks. That's a good question. Yeah, so it does have to do with the ecosystem sort of idea as well. I
Mm-hmm.
think like I like so the first thing I say is I'm in compositionally, well, just aesthetically, I like this idea of multiplicity,
Mm-hmm.
this idea of which you've alluded to, of course. So this
Mm-hmm.
idea that you have multiple things in an environment and these things can sort of like do actions in this environment and interact with each other. And what I find
Mm-hmm.
really interesting is that this idea of like having multiple sounds, but not have the sounds just be sort of like passive things. I sort of like understand sound as this like active phenomenon and as
Mm-hmm.
like beings almost. And this idea of interaction I find really interesting because I think of like these sounds as beings interacting with themselves
Mm-hmm.
and also interacting with their environment, but
Right.
also these interactions sort of like taking a life of their own. So it's
Right.
almost like exponential, this
Mm.
sort of like
Right.
how much interaction can occur
Right.
this and
Right.
it all becomes like this web. So it's I guess the way I think about this so like this idea of
Mm-hmm.
interactivity that you're talking about is that um the multiplicity is not the sum of the things of a particular environment. It's not just the sum. It's like you have to sort of like understand the interaction as this like emergent phenomenon that is not yeah it's not like deterministic, and that sort of like breeds other interactions, and it becomes like this whole
Mm-hmm.
essentially the whole ecosystem or the whole like system of interactivity or a whole network of interactivity
Mm-hmm.
becomes a living thing as well.
Right.
And it's not like deterministic, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's what I find really interesting about
Mm.
multiplicity and
I
interactivity.
I see. I see. That's a very interesting point of view. Okay. Wow. Um, so a little bit more, dive into your work processes and stuff. So when you're deciding between fixed media composition and interactive live performance, what consideration guides your choice?
Yeah. Um, so I think like so I'm at an interesting stage pedagogically. I think like
Mm-hmm.
I'm still very, very young as a composer, but like
Mm-hmm.
I'm also at a stage where I'm as I was mentioning with my undergrad, I'm no longer at a stage where I'm like concerned with like learning orchestration and
Mm-hmm.
things. And not that I'm not saying I've mastered orchestration or anything like that, but like
Mm-hmm.
I guess my agenda now is to like um focus on my aesthetic penchants, right?
Right.
And I think like I still tend to write like acoustic music
Mm-hmm.
where yeah, especially chamber music where
Mm-hmm.
like the score is like um conventionally,
Mm-hmm.
sort of like notated. I still use staff notation and everything because it allows me to focus on, the particular problems that a piece might have, that I sort of like have in mind when I'm tackling a piece. So like it's almost like in a sense I'm like if I introduce like live electronics into this piece, it might become too complex for my,
Mm,
brain to handle at a time.
I
So for
see.
now, I'm focusing more on acoustic pieces. But I also like do a lot of, I also, I guess, in a sense, go on the other end of the spectrum, and um, I do a lot of like improvisation. Especially
Oh,
like these days, it's like on a laptop or something, or
right.
electronics. So like, and I think like. Yeah, it's still very important to have this like interactive element. I really like improvisation because it's almost like the improvisation provides this space where I can explore these like thresholds, I guess is the way I
Mm,
put it. It's like I'm not sure exactly. I have these aesthetic ideals and I have these like interests, but
mm-hmm.
I also don't know exactly what's going to happen. And I think like this
Right.
this rub between these two
Right.
aspects creates something really interesting.
Right.
And
Right.
I learned from this process, right? So it's
Mm,
almost like right now, and it's not like I'm philosophically opposed to like having live
mm-hmm.
electronics in a
Mm-hmm.
fixed piece.
Mm-hmm.
But oh, by the way, when I say live electronics, I mean like I take like I have like digital signal processing from the instruments. I still do
Mm-hmm.
like tape and I still do like
Mm,
tape and electronics. Sorry,
okay.
tape and chamber ensemble, right? But
Okay. Mm,
um but yeah, it tends to be like I guess like tape pieces or tape and acoustic pieces or like just improvisation.
right.
And I haven't really explored the middle yet, but I find I still find both of ends of the spectrum really
Right.
important for me, right? Because of what I said. Um,
Right.
so,
So, just personal questions for you. So, you say live electronics and tapes and chamber
yeah.
ensemble. What made you to have like those electronic sounds in your composition? What it means
Right.
to you, or how, yeah, how this idea came up to you?
Hmm. Yeah. Like, um, why do I have electronics in my pieces? Like, what leads me to like
Yeah,
decide to have
yeah,
electronics?
yeah. Or do you have a specific sounds you want to create, or how these
Hmm.
two different, well, large mean definition of the live electronic music, and it's all already you're doing it, but I'm curious, you divided, chamber plus tape music plus, and the other one is like live electronic, then how you take as your personal works.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like so most of my works um are I guess most of them are acoustic. That because well it has to do with the thing that I was mentioning before, but it also has to do I mean, to be honest, I'm just more comfortable composing acoustically and it's I think like when you add the thing about electronics is that when you add tape, tape or live electronics,
Hmm.
it's not just like for me, at least for me, it's not just like adding a new sound. It's not just adding like a new player to the chamber ensemble. It's like
Mm,
you're adding this, it's almost like adding a new dimension to the music, right?
mm,
Or exploring a dimension that's perhaps a little less untapped in, purely acoustic music. Not to say that electronic music is like more complex or anything like that, but it's just different, right? It's
Right,
like
different. Yes.
it's like fundamentally different.
Right.
And I think like the way I've been thinking about electronics in my tape work so far is that I was talking about the environment and like beings inside the environment. It doesn't always work like this, but I find the electronics like really conducive to sort of like shaping the
Mm,
environment in which the beings are in. I can also make, of course, I can make the beings through the electronics, but the electronics because of sort of like the malleability and like timbral modification that you can
mm,
do with electronics, and also like there's also like a different temporal attitude that
right.
I have when I'm
Right.
using electronics. It
Mm,
it just becomes this idea of like world building is becomes much more prevalent to me when I'm doing electronics, and also spatialization, right? That's it. It's that all I think like even though you of course you can do that with acoustic instruments as well. This idea of spatialization, it's sort of like um this idea of world building or environment building
mm,
is really I guess that's the way I'm thinking about electronics a lot.
mm,
Not that not but again, not that the acoustic instruments are the beings or they have to be beings, but it's
right.
this yeah, that's why I find electronics really interesting. And
Mm,
I guess like another reason I don't touch live electronics, not that I have a couple of works that use
hmm
like live digital signal
hmm
processing, but the reason I don't touch that as much as at least yet is because there's sort of like an unpredictability in like what sort of sounds will be outputted from the instruments through that even simple signal processing. There's sort of like
mm,
an unpredictability in the concrete sound. And because of my like particular interest in environment building, I think
hmm
like and shaping these little intricacies of the environment. I think like the idea of like tape, especially like spatialized electronics,
hmm
spatialized tape, it's it lends more to my interest in, environment building, I guess. That's the answer I'd give. It's
Mm, I see.
I have I have like a particular idea of what kind of environment I want, I suppose.
Right, right. Wow, interesting. So can you tell me about your experience working with natural sounds in Australia, particularly at the Bunadin, and how you transform
Mm.
these into compositional elements?
Yeah. So yeah, so Bandanon is so I live in Perth, which is on the west
Mm,
coast of Australia. Um and Bandanon is like it's one of the eastern states of Australia in New South Wales. So I think like how would I put it? I guess as a child, as who had to do education in Australia in primary school and high school, or a portion of primary school,
hmm
I sort of like learned about the very diverse flora and fauna in Australia and how it's sort of like in many ways it's unique
hmm
um to the flora and fauna in other parts of the world. I mean, of course, every part of the world has unique
hmm
flora and fauna, but
hmm
I guess I learned more about yeah, I really became like at least from a conceptual point of view, I became acquainted with like the idiosyncrasies of Australian flora and fauna. So like I became interested in it from as a young child, right? But
hmm
um going to Bundanon and like actually like going I hadn't spent a lot of time in rural Australia before.
hmm
I grew up in Perth, which is
hmm
um a city, it's an urban environment. And I went
hmm
to Melbourne, which is one of besides
Right,
Sydney, it's probably the
right.
most,
Right.
urban environment in
Yeah.
Australia. So going to Bundanon, going to rural New South Wales is like a completely new experience for me. Well, not completely new, but it was a very new experience for me because like, I got to like, firstly hear especially at night. So
Mm,
sorry, I should provide more context. When I was at Bandanon, so I stayed there for 6, 7 days in this like in this small house,
mm-hmm,
in like in almost like the middle of nowhere. And it was
mm-hmm.
like I remember at night, in day there was also these beautiful moments, but at night, we if you go outside, it was so loud. You could hear all these animals, and it wasn't just like one group of animals, just really loud. It was like all these different frequencies, all coming from all
Wow.
these different places. And like it was also like this very tactile experience because like I could hear like I don't know what it was exactly. I think there were these like kangaroos sort of like hitting the side of the house I was
Oh,
in. So
wow.
yeah, I could hear the
Uh-huh.
thumbs on the wall, and it was like this very like it was very physical. This experience,
Mm,
this hearing is this this surrounding environment, going outside and like hearing all these things happening and
mm-hmm,
hearing the thumping and the
mm-hmm.
sort of the flying of different creatures and um.
Love what we're creating, you can support us by joining our membership or simply like and share to help us grow.
And I say it's not completely new because I sort of like had imaginations of what this would be like as a child, right? So this is almost like a realization of like sort of like the the very energetic nature of
Mm,
the flora and fauna in rural Australia. So it was a realization, but it also like exceeded my experience, my expectations, right?
mm,
The actual like experience was like
right.
sort of like way more than what I expected. So like I think also it was really like powerful for me because like this interactivity that I was talking before about is like
Mm-hmm,
I could hear it.
mm-hmm.
I could hear this like interactivity. In an urban environment, it's you still of course there's still natural phenomenon, but it's sort of it of course like in the environment I was growing up, you also hear things like traffic and
Right.
uh, you know all the sonic uh characteristics of an urban environment, traffic and
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
people talking and the
mm-hmm,
radio, I don't know,
mm-hmm,
things like that. So like going into like this other environment and hearing this I guess this like natural interactivity in this
mm-hmm,
ecosystem was like
mm-hmm.
a really powerful experience, especially knowing that I was only in like I'm also it's not like I'm above the ecosystem, right? I'm also like part of this network.
Right,
It's not like I'm above any of this. So
right.
it also knowing that like I'm only in like this itty bitty part of
Mm-hmm,
my experience is only like this itty bitty part of the actual ecosystem. Like this itty bitty part was already so powerful for me. Like it
mm,
sort of like made me imagine how
mm.
sort of like beautiful
I
uh
see.
the entire
Right. Like
network of interactivity.
immerse in the place.
Right. Yeah.
Wow.
It was
Wow.
like an environment where the task was not to like analyze and like capture everything because it's
Mm,
impossible to capture everything orally. Right?
right,
It's almost
right,
like be in this place and like understand yourself as like
right,
situated within this
right.
environment. Yeah, it was powerful.
Yeah. Maybe this context relate to like deep listening and complexity for me.
Mhm.
So what practice do you engage in to develop your listening skills, and how do these practice inform the complexity in your work?
Yeah. Thanks. That's a question. I mean, I'll preface this by saying like it's still something. Again, it's not something it's not like orchestration. It's not something I've mastered, right? It's still something
Mm-hmm,
I'm learning, and I'll probably keep learning for the rest of my life.
mm-hmm,
Um, I think my sort of like engagement with complexity and deep listening. Firstly, I think the thing about complexity, it has to do with what I mentioned, bundle actually. It's like the beautiful thing about complexity is that a lot of the times the point is not to capture everything. The point is sometimes like it's this multifaceted phenomenon that that's like partly subjective, but it can also be overwhelming, and sometimes the overwhelm can be
Mm-hmm.
like part of the experience. It can be extremely beautiful. It often is extremely.
Right.
It depends. Sometimes the overwhelm can sort of like represent something
Mm-hmm.
sort of like it can be tragic, or it can be, and that's also powerful, but it's yeah, it's sort of like if it signifies something uh let's say not good in the world,
Mm-hmm.
this power is it's still a very powerful experience, but of course it's sort of like not not unenjoyed uh sort of like powerfulness, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first thing. Like I think like this understanding of complexity as like um firstly like this phenomenon that doesn't have to be like completely understood, but also like it can be powerful in like good and bad ways, I guess is the way
Mm-hmm.
to put it, or
Mm-hmm.
in positive and negative ways. And like more concretely, like so I guess that's the philosophy
Mm-hmm.
behind my deep
Mm-hmm.
listening. More concretely, I guess the way I describe it is that I like to listen to things for like either very long. So if it's like a soundscape or something, or like environment,
Mm-hmm.
a, like a particular environment, I like to sit in this space and sort of like listen to it for a very long time. But if it's like a piece of music or something that's somehow like reproducible, whether through recording or whatever, I like to listen to it over and over again, but like through like almost like different lenses every time. Like
Mm-hmm.
and that can be something very simple, like, oh, I'm going to focus on this instrument, or I'm going to focus on this
Mm-hmm.
instrument. But sometimes it's sort of like sometimes it's a quality. Sometimes it's like I'm gonna focus on like the fragility of this thing, or sometimes I'm gonna focus on this thing. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's and this is what I'm more interested. It's not like focusing on an aspect of the object I'm observing, but like
Mm-hmm.
almost like putting myself into a different mindset. It's like, oh, I'm going
Right.
to like listen to this through a fragile mindset, or I'm going to listen
Mm-hmm.
to this through a hazy mindset, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. It's sort of like understanding my positionality as like
Mm-hmm.
malleable
Mm-hmm.
alongside the thing I focus upon within the
Right.
thing I'm listening to. So it's this repeated listening, but also like sort of like um almost like shifting my subjectivity to these
Mm-hmm.
different places. Obviously, that's limited. I can't how would I put it? I can't like shift my subjectivity to every possible
Mm-hmm.
subjectivity. Or for example, I can never listen in the way that you listen to something, right? But like
Mm-hmm.
just like this, I within what I can do,
Mm-hmm.
within my own confined
Mm-hmm.
gamut of subjectivity, I like moving in these different spots and like
Mm-hmm.
listening over and over again,
Right.
and understanding the sound as like an alive thing, I guess. That's other which I mentioned before. Is like
Right.
just this like passive thing that it's not like it's just this thing that's represented
Mm.
through a spectrogram. It's like this alive phenomenon that sort of like
Yeah.
interacts with me as much as
Yeah.
I observe it, I think is the way I
Mm-hmm. I
think about
love
that.
your openness to things you really want to experience and keep deep listening and trying to do it. Being different positions really inspiring me. Wow.
No, thanks,
Wow,
thanks.
wow. Yeah. So maybe then it's kind of connect to this question, I guess. The concept of antipodal relationship seems to appear in your
Mm.
work. How do you navigate the tension between opposing sonic elements?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, actually, this is I feel like so this is this antipodal relationship thing.
Mm-hmm.
I've been thinking about it for a while, but I feel like actually just made a, let's say, a drastic development in my own practice
Mm,
of how I listen to
okay.
these things. And it's so in the past I sort of like having opposites was interesting to me because well it was very crude actually. I just
Mm-hmm.
if you have opposites, it creates contrast, and
Right.
contrast is a way that you can like sectionalize and create progression in music,
Mm-hmm.
and like which is great, right? But I think like a lot of my music, a lot of my early music was it was almost like schematic, or it was almost like not algorithmic, but it was almost like predictable in the way that
Mm,
these opposites came about. It's like I really like these opposites appearing and having to like appear alongside, let's say like soft and loud, because like it's not just the fact that you've shifted from soft to loud, but it's also
mm,
like this threshold between what it means to have to shift between soft to loud, which is like
right.
really interesting to me. Like it's um and I think like over in my later compositions I've sort of like realized that it's this threshold. It's not actually the fact that it's not like you're in this zone or in this zone that's like
Mm-hmm,
the interest for me, but it's these thresholds between that are really interesting for me. So I think like firstly the way I think about opposites is in the past I would somehow like
mm-hmm,
resolve them,
mm-hmm,
and resolution could mean two things. It could either mean like one of them takes over and becomes like the dominant thing by the end of the
mm-hmm,
piece, or like they somehow like amalgamate to create this neat new thing. But now
mm-hmm,
I'm sort of like interested in this idea of, well, sometimes you have opposites, or sometimes you have things which are like very, very different to each other, but they don't need to like synthesize,
mm-hmm,
they don't need to like come up with a neat amalgamation. It's like
mm-hmm,
things can sort of like be themselves
mm-hmm,
and sort of like act and still like interact with each other and
right,
potentially or not
right,
interact with each other. It's like
right.
this idea of like opposites. It's sort of like this re-examination of what coexistence means for me. Like
Mm-hmm,
things don't have to sort of like sonic things, compositionally, they don't have to like well, yeah, they don't have to synthesize. They don't have to like become this neat uh product of like the initial circumstances. Like uh incongruences and can like stay as incongruences, and that
mm-hmm,
doesn't mean they don't develop. They become new kinds of incongruences, and I
right.
think like
Yeah,
this is really interesting for me, this idea of not synthesizing, at least in the classical sense of
right,
synthesize.
right.
Yeah.
So what attracts to you to working with contradictions and paradoxes in your compositions? How do
Mm.
these tensions create meaning in your work? I'm very
Yeah,
curious
yeah,
about that.
yeah. So I think like the thing about paradoxes, especially is that I like this idea in composition. Well, it's also like a phenomenon in the world, right? It's not
Mm-hmm,
limited to composition, but it's like we have these situations where we have like, let's say, a problem, or we have like, a tension, or like, so some sort of threshold that's being exposed, and like
mm-hmm,
oftentimes, if not
mm-hmm,
most times,
mm-hmm,
there is no solution to this problem. It's like
mm-hmm,
this, it's like not every problem has like this neat solution to it, and I
mm-hmm.
think that's the thing I'm at least now that I'm really interested about
I see.
tensions between contrary things. It's
Mm-hmm,
like it's this whole gamut of our possibility. On
mm-hmm,
one hand, the contrary things can sort of like interact, and there's a potential of like something weird or something
mm-hmm,
like special to come out of that interaction.
mm-hmm,
But at the same time, it's this idea that okay, they might interact, but they might never like sort of like form a neat solution. And
mm-hmm,
that sort of like I think that sort of like relationship is very powerful for me. It's
mm-hmm,
things being themselves and not synthesizing is like a very powerful experience for me. But
mm-hmm,
yeah, I mean, to sum up, yeah, it's that aspect, but also this threshold producing weird results,
mm-hmm,
which I
mm-hmm.
really like. Um, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Wow. So then this answers along to this question, I guess. I'm intrigued by this concept of failure as use of structure in your composition.
Mm.
Could you share an example of how you've intentionally incorporate breakdown or failure as a generative element?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I mentioned in my earlier compositions that I would have these neat solutions and this neat teleology and
Mm-hmm.
directionalities.
Mm-hmm.
I like this idea of like proposing I guess like setting up directionalities in my music or
Mm-hmm.
setting up like um you know sort of like proposing beings in my environment and like having them uh be good at a particular thing in an abstract way,
Mm-hmm.
but have it so that the directionality that's set up or the thing that they're good at is not like satisfied.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess like a classic example is that okay, you set up a direction and it's like it's almost like it just like hits a wall and then like
Mm-hmm.
it is once it hits this wall, it like um it's not that nothing happens, right? Even though the
Mm-hmm.
thing that the being that it was trying to do isn't achieved, like this sort of like running into this barrier produces like a result. It produces this, it aesthetically, it produces like this,
Mm-hmm.
um, sort of like it's almost like the being has to realize that this is its reality, that it can't
Mm-hmm.
succeed in this thing. So that
Mm-hmm.
this hitting a wall is like really interesting for me. Like what happens when, in particular, when a being, has to face a barrier and it can't overcome it, the barrier, and it
Mm-hmm.
realizes that it can't overcome the barrier.
Mm-hmm.
The other idea that I'm really interested in with failure is like um so there's failure there's the kind of failure that's like let's say I'm cooking some this is an example of the heating wall. So let's say I'm
Yeah.
cooking something and I just like completely burn it and it's like it's terrible. It's all burnt and it's like barely edible and it's like
Mm-hmm.
at that moment when the meal is finished,
Mm-hmm.
um it's like very obvious in that moment that I failed to create like a good dish, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's another kind of failure where like let's say you spend your task with one thing in life and your task is like I don't know, find a very small item in like a, in an entire country. Like it's an almost impossible task, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you try your best. Like you could spend years and years doing this,
Mm-hmm.
but there's no point in that process where it's like, aha, I failed, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like this constant search and search that sort of like over time
Mm-hmm.
it's like this failure is like dispersed more over time. It's sort of like you might realize over time like okay, actually this task is like is actually impossible. It's not like the burnt cooking where like
Mm-hmm.
when the meal is done,
Mm-hmm.
when you turn off the fire,
Mm-hmm.
you can see it, you can see that you failed in a sense. This
Right.
searching thing, it's like you can keep going on for it. You can keep trying and trying and trying and trying. But just because you can keep trying and trying doesn't mean you will succeed. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
there is no like there's no temporal point of
Mm-hmm.
like this is the point of failure. This is like the showcase of failure, but it's
Mm-hmm.
like it's almost like you're in this state of failure and you're slowly realizing that things are not working out, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's another kind of failure I'm interested in. It's a quality that yeah, because of these two categories that are proposed,
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested with failure. Yeah.
Right. That is very philosophical and inspiring. Yeah, the because many people I don't think thinking of the failure is not positive, I guess, but I feeling
Yeah.
that, this philosophy of failure by you is more like a positive energy and giving me more insights
Mm,
for me too. So thank you for the answer to that. So
yes.
um so relate to more philosophical question. you've explored the philosophy of composite entities in your work, right?
Mm.
Can you help us understand what this means in relations to sound and how it manifests in your composition?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, thanks. So it has to do with the multiplicity thing that I was talking about before, right?
Mm,
But maybe another. I love metaphors, so I'll bring up
mm,
another a metaphor. So I
mm-hmm,
think of like, let's say you have a forest. A forest with lots of trees, lots of different types of flora and fauna, and
mm-hmm,
the thing about the forest is that you can sort of like look at the different types of focus you can have when you're observing this forest. You can look at the individual trees, right, and see
mm-hmm,
and understand each tree as you can understand as like countably multiple sort of like aggregate of trees, right? So there's this tree here, there's this tree there, so forth and so forth. We have
mm-hmm,
many, many trees. And you can like understand multiplicity from that point of view as like, oh, we have tree X sort of like interacting with tree Y in this way, and like uh it's like very concrete that we have
mm-hmm,
this multiplicity. And let's say you could have like a million trees, right? You can
mm-hmm,
or whatever, but it's this attitude of like being able to count the trees is one kind of multiplicity. The other approach to multiplicity is like looking at the forest and
mm-hmm,
like understanding it as like one just one huge thing, right? It's just like
mm-hmm,
it's made up of different parts, but like rather than understanding, rather than like looking at this thing and saying, "Oh, it's made up of like different Lego or whatever," it's like
mm-hmm,
it's all this one thing. It's almost like these are different organs of like the
mm-hmm,
this one alive thing. So this thing about the composite entity is like, I guess like everything in the world, since everything in the world is, in my eyes, it's multiplicitous. Everything in the world sort of like has this like aspect of, oh, it's made up of like these individual components interacting
mm-hmm,
with each other, but
mm-hmm,
it's also like this single it's also like the single like mass with like all these like different intricate parts.
mm-hmm,
It's um but it's also like you can think of what I find most exciting about the composite, this idea of composite
mm-hmm,
entity is like these are not two different, like these are not the only two different states. It's not like a binary, right? It's like this
mm-hmm,
is like these are two poles on a spectrum almost, or
mm-hmm,
like at least 2 points on a spectrum, and like there's all these in betweens and all these like sort of like if you want like a meso level as opposed to a micro as opposed to like a micro and macro level of
mm-hmm,
like observation, there's all these like different meso levels of observation,
mm-hmm,
and this sort of like meso level of like different levels of looking at the composite entity is like
mm-hmm,
really really interesting to me because like it's in a sense the forest is like it's not quite just these individual things, and it's also not quite just this one single thing. It's not right to call it just a single thing either. It's all these different things. It's all these different levels all packed into one, and it's
mm-hmm,
like this experience.
mm-hmm,
I'm not saying that I quite yet achieved this in my composition, but it's sort of like aspirational. It's like this
mm.
quality that's really interesting to me aesthetically. Yeah.
Right. Wow, that's very interesting. You have a lot of philosophical, approach or attitude towards your composition. So far, based on our conversation, that was very interesting. I have a few more questions. If you have time, okay, can we continue to do it? Okay.
Of course. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
great, awesome. So, um, um, beyond the pure sound, your work seems engaged too with deeper philosophical questions.
Mm,
How do you see the relationship between your music and philosophical exploration?
yeah. Um, yeah. How do I answer this?
It's kind of big questions, but
Yeah, it's
yeah,
a
you
big
can
question.
break it down.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll say this. It's like, so I studied a fair amount of philosophy at Harvard as well. Not, sort of like in the philosophy department at Harvard.
Mm,
Um, but like I guess I don't see my it's not that I don't see my compositions like answering philosophical questions that sort of like crop up in philosophy academia, right? I'm not
Mm-hmm.
It's not like I compose a piece to sort of like reveal, I don't know, the question of whether we have free will or something, or
Mm,
like, the ontology of mathematics, or
mm,
whether the world is platonic.
mm,
It's it's not like my works aren't philosophical in that sense, right?
mm-hmm,
It's almost like the philosophical questions yeah, it's not philosophical in an academic sense. The philosophical questions are almost like, what happens when I have this abstract thing do this other abstract thing? Or what
mm,
happens if I have this abstract environment and it has to face this abstract
mm-hmm,
problem?
mm-hmm,
Of course, this is not a very concrete thing,
mm-hmm,
but it's like, composition is like, even though it's a very sound is like a very tangible and like a live phenomenon, it's
mm-hmm,
also like this, it's almost like this, for me, it's this way to answer these sort of like, um inner philosophical questions. And by inner, I mean like they're sort of like emotionally localized for me. It's like,
mm,
in my mind, this is like an interesting situation, but it's like in the real world, like there's no way, it's like these problems do come from the real world, in the sense that my emotions are sort of like responses to the real world.
right.
So of course, they're not like completely platonic or
Mm-hmm,
anything,
mm-hmm,
but it's like these things, like my emotional configuration is like inside me as well,
mm,
in a sense, as opposed to like from the exterior. So like my compositions are like, um they're not justice, but they're very much like this vehicle for me to like, it's almost like an abstract playground for me. Even though
mm,
it's also tangible at the same time. It's like
right.
this space where, I can sort of like engage with these abstract situations in my head. It's philosophical in that sense.
I see, I see. Oh, wow, awesome. That's great. Many of your pieces engaged with ideas of system strain and collapse. How does
Hmm.
your music reflect or respond to our current ecological crisis?
Yeah, 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 thanks.
Mm,
So um so I was talking about this idea of failure before, and
mm,
we were just talking about this idea of, abstraction,
right.
and and I think like the thing about my pieces is that um how would I say it? I wouldn't say my pieces are like, absolute or whatever. They're not like fully removed from the world, but they're like, they are abstract to some extent, in the sense that they are like, as I was saying this before, they're like this. I try to deal with, like, rather than being about like an explicit thing in the world, I try to deal with like this particular like emotional situation,
Mm,
which is still a real thing. It's not like absolute,
mm,
because these emotional situations, these emotional configurations come from my response to the world.
mm,
Most of my pieces are like that, but I do have a couple of pieces, as you're alluding to. I do have a couple of pieces which are like much more, they are explicitly concerned with like, ecological, the sort of like ecological crisis that we're
mm,
facing right now. And sort of like, yeah, the pieces are actually about these things. And I guess the way I think about system failure and strain, in that
mm,
sense, is that, in relation to the ecological crisis, is that the way it it has to do with what I was talking about before. It In this world,
mm,
it's very hard for us. Well, it's not just very hard, it's impossible for any single one of us, or even like a group of us, to sort of like have a complete idea of, the full scale of complexity and intricacy of the ecosystem.
Right.
So on one hand, this thing is like it's completely it's very big, it's very complex, and it's very beautiful, and it's sort of like it's it's too much for like the anthropological domain to sort of like we can't just analyze it and completely understand it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this leads to situations where um people people are obviously motivated by particular interests, and
Mm-hmm.
there are situations in society where like these interests are sort of pursued, but there's no like big there's no sort of like um or at least there's not enough consideration for like the impact this has on like a much longer scale than sort of like what the human level what the anthropological level is uh sort of like concerned with on a sensorial level, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard for us. What I'm saying is that it's very hard for us to like understand. I mean, not just on ecology, but it's very hard for us to understand the full scale of every action that we do, and sort of like all of the structures that we create as well. So, because of that, it leads to these situations in societies where various structures are created or various actions are pursued.
Love what we're creating? You can support us by joining our membership or simply like and share to help us grow.
And they seem fine. It seems like absolutely fine to pursue them because, like,
Mm-hmm.
on the small scale, on the microtemporal level, or on the sensorial level, if you like,
Mm-hmm.
it's like it produces a good result or it satisfies something. But
Mm-hmm.
like, if you look on like a scale, if you're not so anthropocentric, like,
Mm-hmm.
and you look at the impact of the thing that you're doing, it leads to it leads to catastrophe, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's like
Mm-hmm.
it's I guess that's what I've been thinking about in these pieces that deal with ecological crisis.
Mm-hmm.
It's like those pieces like deal with failure in the sense that I present these situations that or like these objects or these beings that are doing things which seem okay. They like
Mm-hmm.
okay, you produce this thing and they seem like they
Mm-hmm.
seem great on the micro level, but over time it's sort of like it reveals like a
Right.
problem with like what happens to the environment itself, not to the being, but to the
Mm-hmm.
environment itself. Um, if you continue to pursue this thing. So
Mm-hmm.
it's sort of like this threshold between like the micro level of like instant satiability
Mm-hmm.
versus like um what is like the overall impact of the environment,
Mm-hmm.
which is sort of like not entirely concerned with the sensorial, but does affect the sensorial on a longer scale, right? It's this
Right.
idea of
Right.
these things which seem enjoyable or seem okay
Mm-hmm.
lead to this like larger system failure, and I guess in essence the pieces are about this idea that not small scale satiabilities are not they're not just a scaling down of they're not like if you have a lot of them you lead to a large scale satiability. It's not as simple as that. In fact, it leads to
Right.
the complete
Right.
ironic, it leads to the complete opposite. It leads to like
Right.
a
Right.
large scale failure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So that's
understood. It's kind of big conceptual, like philosophical approach in your competition, I guess. So
yeah, yeah,
that's why you always, think more, deep more, listening more, and you have like try to be a different perspective of being yourself, I
yeah.
guess. So yeah, thank you so much for this kind of deep questions.
Of course. Thanks for the questions. Yeah.
Mm. So it's kind of different question, but still relate to you. Um, so what I was wondering was, many of your pieces, I mean, no, your work, has been described as examining modernist paradoxes. How do you
Mm.
approach critiquing or disrupting established musical traditions and power structures?
Yeah, yeah. Thanks. That's a good question. So um I guess like most simply, I've always been, even though I really like from a sonic perspective, I really like a lot of the sounds that come, from the late 20th century European avant-garde and
Mm-hmm.
well, not just European, but also America.
Mm-hmm.
It's sonically like I'm really interested in these sounds because it's like sort of like this um they're not trying to hide noise. They're not trying to detract the noise and like produce this like pure thing, right? The noise is part of the language. That's what I really
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
about this sort of like modernist
Mm-hmm.
perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But perhaps what I'm not so much a fan of is like the structuralist attitude that
Mm-hmm.
a lot of this. No, of course I'm not saying all modernist music is like this, but I guess like the general modernist trend is like to um it's almost like a hyperhumanism in a way. It's like
Mm-hmm.
it's I identifies the sort of like composer as this eminent figure who goes about and creates. They have like this idea in their mind, and the job of the composer is to like recreate that, in the form of the piece.
Mm-hmm.
It's like this, almost like this job of like platonic recreation in
Mm-hmm.
the physical world. That's from this modernist paradigm I'm not so much a fan of, because what I find really exciting about composition is that it's like the moments of failure, not just in my music, but in real life,
Mm-hmm.
these moments of failure, these moments of exploration
Mm-hmm.
that really sort of like propel my creative practice and propel me as a person. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can give you an example. It's like when I'm creating electronics, sometimes I do have specific sounds that I want to create, but sometimes, let's say I'm working in Max MSP and I just like put in the complete wrong number or wrong
Mm-hmm.
logic. And it just it still makes a sound, but the sound is like nothing that I expected.
Mm-hmm.
And, I have these moments like, oh, what, that's actually really interesting, and that
Mm-hmm.
I'll sort of like incorporate that into my
Mm-hmm.
music. It inspires me to do something. That's a very simple example. A more
Uh-huh.
complex example is like sometimes I'm like sort of like writing music, on staff notation. I'm writing music, and I'm like I don't know exactly what's going to unfold, but I create this language where things can interact, and I sort
Mm-hmm.
of like let the things be themselves, and the interaction, where I reach a threshold, I reach a point of where things do interact, and I sort
Mm-hmm.
of like discover things from that interaction, right? It's not that I
Mm-hmm.
discover things just
Mm-hmm.
from my brain. It's not like I figure
Mm-hmm.
out everything and like reproduce it, but it's like the act of like thinking about it and like discovering this threshold is what
Mm-hmm.
inspires me, is what inspires like the development of the composition going forward, right? It's like I guess that's yeah, that's the thing about I guess those are the trepidations I have about modernism, which I sort of like try to
Right.
address in music. Yeah, and also this
Gotcha.
idea of non-synthesis I was talking about is
Mm-hmm.
is really important for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like the world is, the world is not so neat, and it's not so structured. It's and like this sentiment I
Mm-hmm.
really like to explore in my music. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I see, I see. So, at what point, in your development as an artist, did humor become important to your work, and how has its role evolved over time?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think actually like fairly early on,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, okay, so I did mention, I did at the outset of the interview, I was talking about how I began composing and how I
Right.
began composing in college. I lied a little bit in the sense that I I did make like pieces before, but they weren't like pieces that in the sense of like, oh, this is a composition and it's like my thing and it's like this is a piece for you to play. It was more like I it's almost like these just like ridiculous situations
I
in
see.
a notation song. It's almost like, it's like, oh, can I make this program? Can I make Sibelius crash? Or like,
Uh-huh.
if I put enough, it's almost like that's not like I didn't create this as a piece, but it was like
Mm-hmm.
very interesting sonically for me. You know what I mean?
Mm.
So like, I think like humor. I for whatever reason I found it like funny. This idea of like what this like what if I load up all these notes on like the first beat of this notation software so that it might potentially crash. So
Mm.
it's very early on that I've been interested in humor. And I guess in the earlier pieces I'd evoke particular whether through quotation but
Mm-hmm.
or also through like just evocation of a particular like style from the common practice period. I'd evoke something because it's so not because that style is funny, but because the appearance of that style in like a very in the sort of like atmosphere that I sort of like composed in the piece was like almost
Mm.
like a non sequitur. It didn't make sense, and that was like fun. Like for example, I don't know, I'd have like a really like dissonant sound world, and then like this Mozartian thing comes out.
Mm.
That was like as a composer in undergrad, that was like really interesting to me. So I guess it was interesting to me because it was like an example of like the humor was like a mechanism in which like contrast could
Mm.
be realized, right? But now humor is I still have humor. I don't really quote, and I don't really quote older pieces
Mm-hmm.
in the same way, but humor is still like um incorporated in my music, and I find it like a salient force because of the sort of like threshold is
Mm-hmm.
this word threshold I keep using, but
Mm-hmm.
is it's the sort of like threshold it sort of like infers
Mm-hmm.
because like it's there's this kind of like awkwardness or this kind
Mm-hmm.
of not fittingness, but particularly awkwardness. There's something about awkwardness that is really resonates with me that I find really interesting when I'm composing because it's
Mm.
like I'm it creates these situations where like um it almost like opens up new sort of like emotional avenues within the logic
Mm.
of a particular piece. It's like this humor here like creates this sort of like awkwardness. It's awkwardness between like the activities of the beings that were there in that particular time, and it's sort of like it almost like makes them have to like face this like awkward situation and like
Mm-hmm.
it makes them do oh not makes them but it like it sort of like opens up this a sphere of avenues for them to like do these other things, I guess. It opens up things. Humor acts as a way to like open up things through a threshold that is created by awkwardness, I guess is the right.
Right. Awesome.
It's
Awesome.
unexpected, but unexpected in this particular
Mm-hmm.
emotional way, which is
Mm-hmm.
really resonating with me.
Right. Right. Wow. So every piece you create, you are very like serious on each one of those and really put your much energy on to those, right? So that's kind of very inspiring me to think of, how you process all each work going through and, trying to think of, different material or inspiration or even humor. I kind of less think about humor of my composition anyway. But I see some composers does do this is a meaningful way. It's kind of very very insightful and inspiring for me to rethink of my composition process as well. Wow, so that's very yeah, smart way to create another work of yours too, and inspiring. Wow. Mm. So you gave me a lot of inspiration today, and I learning a lot from you, and hearing and listening to your all these stories really meaningful and very powerful. I think. So I was curious, all these your artistic view of composer and an artist made you to keep being in academia, like, you know, even in PhD program, or how did you make a decision to going into PhD program?
Mm. Um, I think why did I do this? I
You just genius.
no. I the decision to do the PhD program, I think it's I really wanted like a situation where I had like a long stretch of time where I could just focus on my work.
Mm,
I guess I could have like tried to sort of like freelance and do that sort of thing. But I was still like firstly, I was still quite young and I was in Australia and it's not so easy to freelance in Australia, at least
mm,
at that age and
mm,
at that point in my career.
mm-hmm,
So this idea of the PhD as like providing this like
mm,
space to like really focus
mm-hmm,
and uh, you know figure out these problems for yourself. In an environment where you can sort of like discuss this with other people and like
right.
be exposed to a whole host of new things. Was really captivating to me. It's
Mm,
like I my undergrad was more like, oh, I'm gonna learn this, I'm gonna learn this, I'm gonna
right,
learn this.
right,
And
right.
the PhD is like I have this space to
Hmm.
like explore my own interests more. I guess is
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that was my
Right.
focus.
Yeah, I see, I see. So so the group of composition student composer, I mean PhD candidate at Harvard, do you have time to have a conversation with your peers, or how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm,
Well, yeah, we do. I've spent like a lot of time talking to my peers, and we have the composition colloquia, and we have these
mm,
residencies where
mm,
we sort of like the residencies are interesting because it's not like the situation where it's not like we hire a team to set up everything and they
mm-hmm,
they just sort of like set up the speakers for us. No, it's we sort of like have to set up everything ourselves. Not and it's not a that's not in my eyes it's not a bad thing at all. It's like this situation where we get to like really work with each other and also like get to hear each other's works.
right.
But yeah, I do get the PhD program is great because I do get this situation where I get to spend a lot of time with these people and
Mm-hmm,
um yeah, they're great. They're great
mm,
people, great
right,
composers.
right,
So I get
right.
to and they're very
Mm-hmm.
different from me, right? So I get to
Yeah.
also like they provide a new perspective on my music, and I provide new perspectives on their music, and
Mm-hmm.
we sort of like discover things together in that way. It's like this
Right.
discourse, yeah.
So, what is the most um, positive experience in your program, and how would you advise for, like younger prospective students in your
Hmm.
program? Like any
Right,
good
right.
advice or any good experience from?
What is the most exciting? You know, I really enjoyed as I said, I really enjoyed the residence. It's really a great privilege to have,
Right.
ensembles play your work, ensembles and individuals play your works. And I learn a lot from those. But actually, it's the composition colloquia. It's when I get to sort of like discuss my music
Mm-hmm.
with others. Not in the sense of like, oh, here's my what I really like about the colloquia at Harvard is that it's not like it's not like you trying to sell yourself as an artist, or it's not like you trying to show like it's not like you trying to introduce yourself or like sort of like teach others about who you
Mm,
are as an artist. I mean, there is an aspect of teaching that is sort of like letting others know what you're interested in, but it's
mm,
also like this space where I can like present what I'm thinking about and what sort of what I think is like a problem for me as a composer. It's
mm,
almost like this space where I can present my
mm-hmm,
what I'm sort of like dissatisfied with
mm,
as a composer. So I think like these colloquia for me, where I get to like talk about it with other people, my problems. It's really no, it's really a special thing. It's
wow.
really, really a special thing for me. So I think like if I had for prospective students, I mean not just to Harvard, but I mean just in general, it's like this um be open, I guess. Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying don't have secrets. Obviously, it's
Yeah.
you don't have a completely open book.
Right,
But it's
right.
like this like opportunity. I'll put it this way: this opportunity to be vulnerable
Mm,
is like really special. So like don't
mm,
um at least in the compositional sense, don't
mm,
be so, like don't be shy of being vulnerable. This
mm.
vulnerability yields something special in the compositional sense.
Wow.
It's,
Very, very, very inspiring advice.
I mean, obviously, people, you can. Everyone has their own pace by
Right.
which to be vulnerable. It's not like,
Yeah.
again, I'm not saying, oh, just be vulnerable all the time.
Right, right,
Obviously,
right, right,
people have
right,
different, senses of their own comfort. But
right, right,
this opportunity to be comfortable,
right.
this opportunity to be vulnerable in general
Mm, yeah,
is a really special thing.
right, right. Do you have a certain reason to, you know, make a decision to be in PhD program? Because many students considering DMA program versus
Mm.
PhD program. So how would you think about it?
Yeah. So. It's a good question. It's a good
Yeah.
question. I think the thing about the PhD, um, I guess it also depends on which country we're talking about DMAs. But at
Mm-hmm.
least United States, the
Mm-hmm.
difference between DMA and a PhD. So my previous two institutions that I went to, University of Melbourne, University of Western Australia,
Mm-hmm.
I studied at conservatories,
Mm,
and that was great. That was a really great experience. But it's I guess like I wasn't sick of it, but it's nothing like that. But I guess I wanted this I guess this new approach to learning composition where it was more conceptually focused. It was almost like more of a humanities
mm,
endeavor than like a purely creative one or like there's this it's almost like in conservatories, not all conservatories are like this, of course, but it's like conservatories, there's this connection to like learning composition as like a craft. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? It's like
right. Yeah.
obviously like learning skills in composition is like it's a great thing you can do, like
Mm,
counterpoint or
mm-hmm.
writing, writing using a particular technique, like
Mm-hmm.
tone roll, whatever. Like
Mm-hmm.
these are things you can learn, and they can be part of your, gamut of expression, and that's cool. This idea of learning composition uh, as a as like a craft that you develop. That's
Mm,
yeah. But I guess like at that point in my life, I was very interested in like learning about like sort of like the conceptual and philosophical implications of my practice and like what it even means philosophically to have a practice in the first place, like all these sort of like more humanities oriented questions. So I think that's the thing about a
mm-hmm.
PhD. It's sort of like not that these other aspects of composition disappear, but
Mm-hmm.
like it allowed me to like focus on this other side of
Mm,
creative practice.
right.
Yeah, so it's not that one, and again, it's not that one's better than the other or anything like that, but
Right.
it's like it provided me with this other experiences, this
Right.
philosophic experience. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So back to your dissertation, so you just made a decision of your topic of research, and do you have a time like timeline to finish it? I mean, you mentioned that you have like
Mm.
halfway through so far, and you have expectation to complete the work, or how does it work?
Yeah, the timeline. So as I said, I've just submitted the prospectus, and
Mm.
I guess like right now, I'll probably finish in 2028.
Mm-hmm.
So, 3 years or so.
Right.
But in a way, I'm at the beginning because I've only just begun, I only now just have a committee, like a
R-
dissertation committee,
Right.
and I'm beginning writing, right? Even though like, yeah, I guess like the dissertation composition is interesting because it includes like pieces, it includes
Mm-hmm.
skills, things like that. So it's like it's not that I begin writing now. In a sense, I've already begun, right?
Right.
But it's like, yeah, it's um, I guess now I have a goal is the way to put
Right.
it. You have the lens in which I want to apply my pieces through, like
Right.
philosophically, is has been
Mm.
established,
Right.
and yeah,
So,
I'll finish it
so you
3 years.
have to have like certain mandatory to have like several works in dissertation, or you can just write a longer one.
It's up to you.
Mm.
For me, it's I'm doing several works, but
Oh, okay.
yeah, yeah,
Nice. I mean, one of your alumni, composer Stephen Prince, I
oh yeah,
was very impressed by his dissertation because
oh
I
yeah.
presented one of his work at one of the classes at BU, and I
Ah,
I learned a lot, and the the music itself, and you know composer Prince himself is really inspiring me to have open to the new world of the compositions and many things. So I learned a
mm,
lot from through the dissertation. So I'm really
cool.
looking forward to see yours too.
Oh, thanks, thanks. What was the piece by Stefan that you?
uh Especially the presentation piece was the generation kill. But other than that, you can see
Ah,
all the collection of his work from the dissertation at your
I see.
online library, so you can see it. So
Right, right,
yeah,
right, right.
so I mean,
Oh, this,
even the handwriting with his works is kind of interesting to me too.
sure.
And yeah, and all the details of notations, and I can see not only the notational and technical things, but also how he put all this music as a his like I think I see his like characters and life in through his dissertation. So that's also inspiring to me to think of
Mhm.
how composers' music is really important to see many things, and how I, as a composer, how I can see my music itself to present the outside of the world. So then more creating a things by one by one is very important things, and it's really meaningful to see how different composers or how they are doing through their composition. So yeah, so that was very very meaningful and important work for me to change like a little bit of perspective, I guess.
Mhm.
So I suggest to his music to other friends and like students to look at it. So
Yeah.
it's how different composers are out there, and you can open your mind, and you not only focus on the one things, and just not only craft your skills, but also think differently, that's that kind of thing. So that's why having you is very important for me to see and learn how you've been doing as a composer, and as a human being, and as a scholar, and educator. So thank you so much for taking time to have this interview with me today.
Of course.
How was it?
It was great. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's I mean it's always great to talk to you, and
Yeah, yeah. I
I
mean, yeah. If I have chance to create a kind of meaningful workshop with, composers and artists, that I really want to create it one. So if you are interested in, I invite you.
Oh, thanks. Oh
Yeah,
yeah, I'd love
yeah,
to. I'd
yeah.
be very interested. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you so much for today. It's really good to see you again. And, it's kind of coincidence to meet at the joint masterclass at BU and
Yeah,
with Haas. And, we have like
that's right.
special reception after the masterclass together. And
That's right.
yeah, and through that, I got to know Kaya more. And she also be in this series. So I'm really excited to have her. 2 days after this today. So she
All
will,
right. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'll talk to her too soon. And I have a lot more wonderful composers and artists in this series. So I'm so happy and honored to have work on this project.
Yeah. Oh wow, that's so exciting. I'm
Yeah,
really excited to see the future
yeah,
iterations of this.
yeah. Do you remember Joseph Weinberg?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah,
I was actually I was the at the like Sarah Nemtsov
mm,
was here this academic year. I was there for that. I mean, I wasn't at the work. I didn't present at the masterclass, but yeah, I saw Josh at that, and he was at the concert as well. Yeah.
yeah, right. Yeah. So already did in this interview with me 10 days ago. And it's really, we had a really interesting conversation. So if you're interested in, come to our channel to watch it. But I haven't uploaded yet, but I had to do the post-production stuff.
Oh, of course.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Oh, you have a lot. You have a lot to do
yeah,
then.
yeah, I have a lot to do, and I already have 10 artists, and then I have scheduled 10 scheduled composers and mentors in near
Wow.
future. So yeah, I'm working on, like content consistently.
Oh, that's really exciting. That's great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, so excited, and thank you so much for make a time for this special interview.
Of course. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, me too. Let's keep in touch, and I'm, looking forward to hearing any updates in near future or projects or collaboration. Anything? Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
open to it.
Hey, me too. Me too.
So, are you
Yeah.
back to school in April? I mean, August?
Yeah, I'll be back. Yeah.
Ah, okay. So I hope you enjoy your relaxed time in Perth.
Oh, thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
meet
Yeah.
more natures.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, thank you, Victor.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Keep
Bye-bye.
Love what we're creating? You can support us by joining our membership or simply like and share to help us grow.